Off the Hook, airing on offthehooksports.com. Your home for real news, real opinions, and what really matters about Tennessee athletics. The Off the Hook podcast at offthehooksports.com or Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or wherever you go for your favorite podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, iHeart. Like, share, follow, subscribe. Off the Hook with Dave Hooker starts now.
Josh Ward is now, and it's all brought to you by Zool Beer Company. Go to ZoolBeer.com, and it is the official craft beer of Off the Hook Sports. Great panoramic view downtown. Josh with the sports animal. Josh, talking the Vols knows them as well as anybody. Want you to hit that like and subscribe button as we're going to break down Tennessee Pitt today. Josh, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Dave. How are you?
I'm well. It was such a weird week last week with the Thursday night game, but finally kind of a normal sort of rhythm. But I haven't asked you what you thought about Tennessee's outing, but I want to get right to Pitt. But first, give me your thumbnail sketch of what you thought the highs and lows of Thursday. There were a lot of highs. It's like a Cheech and Chong movie.
Yeah, a lot of smoke in the stadium from all the fireworks, so that made sense. I thought Tennessee did what it was supposed to, just blowing out a team, and Tennessee was not perfect. College football teams aren't perfect, ever, but Tennessee also has really had a difficult time taking care of opponents to that level. An FBS team that I don't think is going to be a really high-level group of five team this year, but offensively, you could tell that Hendon Hooker knows what he's doing running the offense. He wasn't perfect again to bring it back to that. Missed on some throws. He might have made a decision or two that could be costly against an SEC team with more speed and more athletes. But he did what he's supposed to. I think Brew McCoy is going to be really impactful in this offense. You can tell how physical he is, and depth on the defensive side is real. How many high-level playmakers do they have? We'll get a better idea against teams like Pitt and Florida in a couple of weeks. But they do have more depth, I think, up front and in the secondary.
All right, let's turn it to Pitt. It is a way different football team in terms of talent, but it's also a way different football team in terms of last year and the way they approach the game. So as we break them down, we remind you, downtown Knoxville is a great place to go hang out. Zool Beer Company, and they're the official craft beer of Off the Hook Sports, and they've got ice cream beer ice cream. I always get them confused, but yes, you can have ice cream and beer. Don't give it to your kids, Josh, because it does have alcohol in it. But what do you think of Pitt? They were on at the same time, but knowing you, I'm sure you either TiVo'd or DVR'd that game and went back and watched it. What were your impressions against a much more quality opponent?
Well, Pitt is a veteran team. You can tell Keaton Slovis comes in, and you can see, I think, the talent that he has early on. He wasn't throwing the football a lot, but he was connecting on some big yardage plays. And I think at wide receiver, even without Jordan Addison, you can tell that Wayne and Mumfield, who's come in as a transfer and a former Tennessee player, and Bub Means, he was Gerard Means when he was at Tennessee. These are guys that can make some plays. So we'll get a better test of that secondary I was talking about to see, can they make plays like we saw from Tamarion McDonald and Kamal Haddon. Warren Burrell is probably a player that Pittsburgh's going to say, okay, let's go after him a little bit and let's see if he can get stops, because he didn't against Purdue. And I think there's still some questions coming out of the Ball State game. But to your question about Pitt, I was surprised that they didn't run the football more effectively, considering that offensive line. Now they have an injury question at running back, so that's concerning for the Panthers. They do have veterans in that backfield, even without Hammond if he can't go. Defensive line, they've got some guys, but linebacker I think is a question. And then, I think they're pretty confident what they have in the secondary, but Tennessee is equally as confident at wide receiver. So I think it's a pretty good matchup. I would give Tennessee the advantage going in. The odds makers give Tennessee the advantage going in, and I think that's right.
It is a completely different schematic approach based off play action. And watching Pitt last year, I mean, that was as West Coast as you can get. So I'm curious what you think in terms of Tennessee's defense, what they match up better against a play action group that can slow the passing attack or slow the rush, excuse me, or that quick hitting throwing game.
Well, until I get a definitive answer on how good the secondary is, I'd probably go that route. I think there's still probably some matchup advantages that opposing teams with good enough wide receiver talent that they can make some plays. And I do like the ability of Byron Young and Tyler Barron up front, and Joshua Joseph could come on, and there's more depth, as I mentioned earlier. So maybe a better chance for 4 quarters to sustain that energy up front. If you're getting the ball out quickly, that can kind of negate what Byron Young and Tyler are able to do. As we saw no sacks last week, I don't think that's a big deal. It's not nothing. It's worth talking about, but it's also not something to overreact to. But if I'm an opposing team, I'm trying to get the ball out quickly. I'm trying to see if we can go after a couple of Tennessee's defensive backs, force them into mistakes, or they align correctly. Those things that I'm sure Willie Martinez and Tim Banks looked at on film after the Ball State game. That's probably what the game is more useful for, not to see how you did against the opposing team's man. What kind of mental decisions or mistakes were your own players making? I think that's something to get figured out. Like, Christian Charles, I think they probably saw some things that he was doing incorrectly because he's not as experienced out there at corner. Do they get some of those things cleaned up? Just like Pitt at linebacker in the run defense, I think Pat Narduzzi saw some things that frustrated him, and they're trying to get cleaned up. The week 1 to week 2 conversation, I think that's really what it's about.
Good news, bad news. The good news is I thought there was only one player that was a bit of a no-show against Ball State, and that's the good news. There was just one. And the bad news is it's one of their best players. Jeremy Banks didn't make a lot of plays. Your thoughts on that? It's not, again, like the pass rush, not the end of the world, but just your thoughts against Ball State.
Well, I'm curious in this kind of game, is he more active in trying to go get the quarterback, be a playmaker in the backfield? I don't know that, but that's kind of what I would think. In the month leading up to the season, I thought Jeremy Banks was one of the positives that we heard about from behind the scenes in terms of how locked in he's been, his decision making, leadership, understanding what the coach is asking of him at linebacker. Considering he's still a relatively inexperienced player at that position a year ago when he was trying to get things started in this new defense under Tim Banks. So I still think for this defense, Jeremy is a positive. Depth is still a concern with the unknown status of Juwan Mitchell and how things will play out. But Aaron Beasley looked like a good linebacker for Tennessee last week against Ball State. Again, qualifier of the opponent. Let's see against other teams. But I still, if I'm saying which players am I most confident in on Tennessee's defense this season, Jeremy Banks is going to still rank pretty high after week 1.
It used to be difficult, I think, for coaches not to release injury information, but now it's just commonplace. Are you hearing anything behind the scenes about Juwan Mitchell in particular?
Not from a health standpoint. No, I think physically he's okay. I think it's more off the field taking care of business without knowing all the specifics. I think that's what it comes down to is being available by the coach's decision, not health. And he's a guy that fans want to know about because he led Texas in tackles a couple years ago, and he came to Tennessee with a lot of excitement because they had to replace Quavaris Crouch and Henry To'oTo'o. And it's like, okay, we got Mitchell coming in from Texas. Look what he was able to do. And didn't work out. I think injuries were an issue last year for sure, but also, trying to fit into the culture and make sure that when they're starting up the program, talking about Josh Heupel and the coaching staff, that they had the right kind of buy-in from every player. And I think they're still looking for that from Juwan Mitchell, which has to be frustrating for Heupel. I'm sure it is for fans, but man, the amount of questions that I think we get on a daily basis of what's going on with Juwan, until you see him out there on a regular basis, I think it's difficult to know that you can count on him. If you have Juwan Mitchell playing this year, that is a positive for Tennessee's defense. I can't guarantee anything right now.
Wow. You kind of open the door, and don't let me jump to conclusions, but you kind of open the door a little bit. Is it possible he would be in such trouble he wouldn't play this year? I mean, is that, I guess, a possibility?
No, I don't think that necessarily. I think the plan is for him to be back probably in the next couple of weeks. But again, the accountability is something that you're looking for, and I don't have anything to point to there. So, like guaranteeing that he's going to play 10 games because I think it's unlikely he's playing this week. So you have 10 games remaining. I can't sit here and guarantee that that's going to be the case. There are other players on the team that I'm much more confident in saying that about. Pretty much everybody.
Pretty much everybody. Fair. Josh, Tennessee, I was going through a list that somebody put out, and goodness gracious, I don't want any more lists. That's the summer. Okay. I'm done with the list. But there was
Yeah.
one that came out after week 1 that I found intriguing that had, I didn't remember where they had Tennessee in the list, but I could make a strong argument that Tennessee's the third best team in the SEC. I don't know if they are, but I could make that argument. Is that insano?
No, well, it's not insane. The I think the argument would be, well, the offense could be so good that that will vault Tennessee to that position. I would not have Tennessee there. It's only 1 week of football. Uh, I would almost disqualify Tennessee. There are a few schools that I would disqualify just based on who they played, or like in LSU's case, losing. They're obviously not going to qualify for that position. Florida, I moved up in my own personal ranking that we did on our radio show this week, just because I saw them beat a team that's ranked in the top 10. I know it's a preseason ranking, but it's not like Utah's a chump team. That's a solid team that's well coached, and that's an impressive win for Florida. There's no argument otherwise. So Alabama and Georgia are obviously the top two. You choose the order. It's really more of a 1A, 1B. But there are several teams. I think Arkansas, Texas A&M, Florida, and Tennessee you can throw into the conversation, but I need to see Tennessee against Pitt, and I need to see Tennessee beat a quality team before I'm ready to say that the team that went 7-5, 7-6 with the bowl loss is now the third best team, with questions that just haven't had a chance to be answered yet. Answered some questions against Pitt, get a nice win on the road, and I think the conversation becomes a lot more real. But Florida beating Utah, Arkansas beating Cincinnati, and what Sam Pittman's done there, and then Texas A&M's, it's really about the roster. I mean, quarterback's a real question. That's a real question for Texas A&M still. But the roster, they're so loaded. They, to me, have to be a part of that conversation too.
Josh, I'm about, I think about 3 years older than you. Is that right?
3 times a certain number, yeah.
Ouch. Okay, so my main memory was growing up was a Johnny Majors walking the sideline, and my main memory on Sunday mornings was just the most awesome coaches show in the history of man,
Mhm.
with John Ward, no relation, but I just it was just fantastic. I'm curious, being you are a little over a decade younger than me. What are your memories of Johnny Majors? Because at the time that you were really into football, you probably saw some of Majors, but you saw the transition, and Fulmer was
Mhm.
probably the guy at your age. Am I right?
Yeah, those are probably my strongest memories is around that time, the transition, and I was still younger, so not knowing some of the stories that I'm well aware of now from that transition. But yeah, in terms of that time watching the transition, and to me, I'm sure it was just a natural transition of, okay, here's this assistant that's taking over, and he's a former Tennessee player himself, and what did I know? So Heath Schuler and how great he was as a quarterback at Tennessee, and then of course what happened after that. The memories get a lot stronger of following. But yeah, so I was born in '85, so in that time I'm in the 7, 8 year old range, and I did have the great fortune of getting to know Johnny Majors a little bit, worked with him some, and he did some work with our radio station. So I had the great fortune, I mean that, to be around him in later years, and yeah, I loved him. I thought Johnny Majors was great.
No, he was incredible, and of course, I asked that because it's the Johnny Majors Classic of
Sure.
Tennessee Pitt. For those that maybe didn't know, but um, do you have a Johnny Majors story that you would want to share? I've got a couple, and they're pretty awesome. I can tell you another time, but
Mhm.
do you have one that you in particular would want to share?
Yeah, so the stories that that would just come to mind for me in terms of personal interaction, which were great. We did this show called Coach's Cabana. It didn't last long. It was really kind of ahead of its time. It was like the mega cast that ESPN does, where it's like a side channel, so you can watch the game with coaches, or there's like a fan broadcast or something like that. So we did this Coach's Cabana, and Barry Switzer was behind it, so that was cool. Had a couple of um, phone calls with Barry Switzer, just talking about plans and all that stuff, because he and Johnny Majors were close. So getting to do that show with Johnny Majors, and I was the host, he was the analyst, so we're watching the game with fans, and people are online commenting to us while they're watching it with us, was just a blast. But we did it on the Strip. So yeah, is it a story, or it's more just an observation? He was still a rock star on campus. We had people coming up while we were live, so I would manage things, because Johnny was not going to turn away any Tennessee fans. So fans would come up while we're live, and we have producers that are trying to say, no, they're on the air. But Johnny wasn't going to say, hey, I'll talk to you in 10 minutes. He was going to talk to him. So he was great with Tennessee fans. He loved university. He was passionate about it. He told me things off the record that made me laugh. Anybody can probably guess, but he was great. I just the show didn't last very long. It needed more support at the time, and I was really disappointed because I just had so much fun working with Johnny.
Now, I did a pilot with him, the Johnny Majors show, and TV setup and everything. And you talk about still being a rock star. Yeah, he was, and it was just being around him. I was always taken aback, Josh, with how sharp he was in his elderly years. I mean, I hope to be that sharp when I'm 50. He was that sharp when he was like 75.
Oh, yeah, memory was terrific, and he would go into great detail. And what's also often brought up is the Heisman, right? Didn't win the Heisman, and I think I made just a remark of, it should have been yours. That came up in conversation somehow, and he said, no, don't say that. So he didn't want to take away from anybody else. So and he was just he was really cool. Now, very proud of what he had done at the University of Tennessee, and when he had strong opinions, he would let you know about those strong opinions about what had happened at the University of Tennessee or where things were. But that was one of my favorite things, that his opinion was going to be shared, and he meant it, and he was direct about it. But he had a lot of fun too. He had a great personality, and I'd still see him over the years because he'd continue to do some work with our radio station. And every time I saw him, he's like, it's a shame that show, because we had a good thing going. So that really made me feel good too, that he enjoyed doing the show, and he had a positive reflection on working with me.
It's too bad that didn't make it because and I hate that the Johnny Majors show didn't make it either, but he called me and said, "Yep, looks like we got a cowboy without a hat or a cowboy without some pistols, and we need you to get out there and sell it." And I said, I always called him Coach. He was the only guy I called Coach. And I said, Coach, I'm working at the News Sentinel. I'm also, I'm hosting a radio show. I got a lot going on. I don't have time. The other funny story, if you want to fill in the blank, when I called him about being on a radio show and I said, "Hey, I just thought you might want to be on and talk about Philip Fulmer being the new AD." Goes, "What? What?" And I said, "Oh, did you not know that?" Big blank space that we can't air here. And then it ended with, Is this on the record? This isn't on the record." And then I said, "Well, that's fine, because I couldn't use any of that, Coach." And he said, "All right, I don't want to do the radio show." Okay.
Yeah.
It is nice, Josh, that he's remembered, I think, in a fond way, because there was a period of time in that 90s where he seemed to take a lot of pot shots at Philip Fulmer during golf tournaments. He's not remembered like that anymore, and I'm happy about that.
He is a college football legend. He's a great all-time college football player. He won a national championship as a coach in a great spot there at Pitt. He decided to return to his alma mater, and he helped return Tennessee to a championship level in the SEC. And then when Philip Fulmer took over the program, he took over a football program in tremendous shape. How many conversations have we had over the last 15 years of a coach inheriting a program and having to rebuild a mess? Johnny Majors did not leave that behind. He obviously wanted to continue on coaching, but he did so much for the University of Tennessee, for college football. It's funny you mentioned calling him coach. A plug that I would give is, it's from a few years ago. I think right after he passed. But Ryan McGee, University of Tennessee grad, Ryan, he wrote a great column on. He was at UT when John Majors was the coach, and how that was his, like, everybody has their coach, and John Majors was his coach, and that applies to a lot of people. He was the best.
Great stuff. Josh, certainly appreciate it. Again, Josh, brought to you by Zool Beer Company, zoolbeer.com. You've tasted the Zool. Your thoughts on the Zool?
Yeah, love the Zool. Mexican lager ranks very high. Love the Seltzer too. So that's the cool thing, is they have all different kinds of options, flavors, whatever your favorite taste might be. You'll never see me be kind of a beer snob for whatever somebody else likes to try or taste. So try it out. You'll find something you really like at Zool.
Yep, that is Josh Ward of the Sports Animal. You can hear him from noon to 3 each and every weekday. He's awesome. Again, go to zoolbeer.com. They got great merch too. This has been a production of Off the Hook Sports.